Graveyards can be such peaceful places, but not for everyone. Whether it's the 1800s or the 21st century, it's difficult for anyone to imagine their loved ones lying beneath the ground. Most people don't imagine living during a time when something so virulent and deadly can fill a place like this so quickly, shattering the dreams of so many families.
If you listen closely, you can hear the whispers from the winds telling us the tale of the Beldonshire plague.
It was a scream that woke her. It ripped through her heavy slumber like a sharp knife tearing through flesh. Loud and full of anguish, it felt as if someone had screamed directly in her ear, crying out for her to waken. Instantly, she sat up, her heart pounding, her lungs gasping for air. Without thinking, she reached her hand out to where William should be lying next to her to see if he had heard it, but of course he wasn't there. The plague had taken him over 6 weeks ago. His side of the bed was cold and empty, like the look his eyes had held right after he had drawn in his final breath on that horrible day. A small sob escaped Anna's lips, and she shivered in the chill air of the late October night. Outside, she heard the wind howl around the little house. From downstairs, she heard the old grandfather clock, the one that William had taken such pride in, chime twice. 2 a.m. on October 31st. She was all alone in the small, dark bedchamber, alone with just her fear and the wind. Suddenly, she thought, Thomas. Quickly, she threw off the thick quilt that had covered her. The stinging cold in the room took Anna's breath away as she fumbled to light the candle that stood on the small table next to her bedside. Once the flame had caught and held, she turned and grabbed William's wool coat that lay at the foot of the bed. She threw it over her, grateful for its warmth and heaviness. It was much too big for her. William had been a large man, but Anna found such comfort in being lost in the folds of the coat. It enveloped her, almost as if William was once again there to wrap his strong arms about her as he had so many times during their years together. After he died, they had wanted to burn his coat, as they had all his other clothing, but she had refused to let them take it. She had clasped it to her breast, sobbing and rocking with it in her arms, until finally they had all gone away and left it with her. Anna snatched the candle from the table and pulled open the door to her room. The wind was louder in the hallway. And through the large window to her left, Anna could see the black branches of the trees tossing back and forth, looking like skeletal hands reaching and scraping across the dark night sky. She shivered, clutching the coat tighter to her, and raced down the hall, her bare feet aching with the icy cold that crept up from the floor beneath her. She reached the door at the end of the hallway and carefully pulled it open. She paused in the doorway for a moment before fully entering the bedchamber. Deliberately, she focused her eyes on the bed on her left hand, where a small shape lay sleeping. She purposefully averted her gaze from the smaller, empty bed on her right. She did not want to see it. Taking a deep breath, Anna moved toward the occupied bed. By the thin light of the candle, Anna was relieved to see that Thomas was sleeping soundly. The scream had not come from him, nor had he seemed to have heard it. Anna bent down and gently swept back a blonde curl of his hair that had fallen across his cheek as he slept. She watched his chest rise and fall with each breath. He was so beautiful, her son, so like his father. He was her only family now, so precious. Carefully, she placed the back of her hand against his forehead, checking for any signs of a fever, a practiced gesture that she had used many times over the last few horrific months of illness and death. Thankfully, he felt cool to her touch, normal, and Anna gently straightened the bedclothes around him and turned to leave the room. As she did so, the candle caught the other bed in its light, and Anna had to throw a hand over her mouth to stifle the sharp cry of pain that threatened to come out at the sight of it. For a moment she thought her legs would give out beneath her, but she shut her eyes tightly and willed herself to stay upright as the anguished waves of misery and grief tore through her body. The bed, the little empty bed. Charlotte, her baby, only 5 years old and taken so swiftly in one horrible night of fever and suffering. Charlotte. At the thought of her daughter, Anna began to cry. Swiftly, she moved out of the room, afraid that she would awaken Thomas with her tears. She closed the door behind her and staggered down the hall toward her bedchamber. She made it only as far as the hallway window before she collapsed, racking sobs taking over her body. Finally, when she could cry no more, Anna lifted her head and pressed her face against the cool glass of the window. Below her, she could just make out the graveyard that stood next to the little house, the vicarage, where William and Anna had lived since they had come to Beldonshire all those years ago. For William had been parson in the village, and the house in the graveyard had been theirs. Anna had always loved the graveyard, tending it with care, taking it on as one of her duties as the minister's wife. Now it was home to her beloveds. It was a comfort to her to have her sweet husband and little girl buried so near. Tonight, however, the graveyard looked forbidding. The last of the autumn leaves had been ripped away, and an icy hard rain had begun to fall. Anna shuddered to think of her loved ones down there all alone, so cold in their graves. With a deep sigh, she pulled herself up from the floor and turned to enter her bedchamber. A sudden movement in the graveyard caught her eye. Someone was out there. But how could that be? Who would be now out on this bitter, bitter night? She watched as the figure moved slowly from gravestone to gravestone, pausing at each as if searching for a particular name. The figure was small, smaller than an adult. Suddenly, Anna realized it was a child. A child was wandering about the graveyard all alone on this miserable night. Anna knew she had to bring the child in from the cold. Quickly, she turned from the window and ran down the little wooden staircase to the front door. At the bottom, she paused long enough to slide on her shoes. Then she yanked on the heavy front door and pulled it open, letting it slam shut behind her as she slipped out onto the doorstep. The wind and the rain ripped at Anna's hair and body, and she once again gave thanks for William's warm coat. As she peered through the rain, she saw the child standing only a few yards away from her, stopped in front of some gravestones. Anna ran towards the figure, but slowed a bit as she realized where the child had paused. The child stood in front of the graves of William and Charlotte. As she approached, Anna saw that there was now a third headstone there, one that had never been there before. With growing dread, Anna walked past the child without looking, her eyes focused only on the stone ahead. She sank down in front of it and read the words, "Here lies the body of Thomas Gideon, beloved son of William and Anna, born November 17th, 1836, died October 31st, 1844. Anna shook her head in confusion. How could this be? Thomas was alive. He was sleeping upstairs. She had just seen him. As she knelt, trying to understand, Anna suddenly felt a small pair of arms slip around her neck from behind. She felt the heavy weight of the child on her back and heard a whisper, "I love you, Mama," in her ear. Anna slowly turned to look and screamed as she saw the child's face for the first time.
Anna was drowning. Drowning in William's coat weighed down by the rain. Drowning in panic that squeezed breath from her throat. And drowning in the sight of Charlotte, her daughter, her dead daughter, who was there in the graveyard, smiling over her shoulder. Charlotte's hair was white as the moon, and where there had once been beautiful ringlets, now were matted clumps sticking out at odd ends. Charlotte's eyes, cheeks, and lips were a dark gray, her skin as alabaster as her hair. A huge clap of thunder startled Anna, and her breath came back to her in a gasp. Charlotte did not notice the rain, did not hear the thunder. She kept her bony arms tight around Anna's chest, just like the hug she used to give after bedtime prayers before lullabies and ghost stories. "It's just a story," Anna whispered, "just a ghost story." And Charlotte leaned forward and whispered in Anna's ear, "Tell me a story, Mama." Her touch seemed real. Her voice seemed real. Charlotte opened her dark gray lips and smiled wide, and then she laughed. It was the worst sound Anna had ever heard. "Who are you?" Anna whispered. Charlotte skipped around the tombstone singing a bright song that had no words. She was barefoot, skipping and enjoying herself. "Who are you?" Anna called out, her voice stronger. Charlotte laughed again. She sang louder. And then she was laughing and singing. The noises should have been the most beautiful to Anna's ears, but they terrified her. They enraged her. "Who are you?" Everything stopped. Charlotte stood still, pouting, as when Anna used to scold her for tormenting her brother. "Thomas!" Anna cried. Remembering her first horror, she struggled out of William's coat and crawled to the newest tombstone. "Thomas Gideon," she read, "died." Anna ran her fingers through the lettering, feeling how expertly they had been carved. She stood, staring down her dead child. "You tell me," Anna commanded. "And tell me now, no riddles or songs. Who are you?" Charlotte stayed pouting as a wind picked up, and Anna shielded her eyes amid violent swirls of rocks and sticks. "Mama," Charlotte said, "I'm not having any fun." Some of the whirling debris made contact with Anna's body, bruising her arms and thighs, snagging on her water-leaden nightgown. "Mama," Charlotte repeated, "I said I am not having any fun." A rock hit Anna in the temple and she fell, blood trickling down her face. And in an instant, it all stopped. Rocks and sticks hovered in the air, then all fell together in an invisible command. A rock landed on Anna's ankle, and she cried out in pain. She was able to sit up, and she noticed the graveyard was empty. Charlotte was gone. The clouds were leaving, the moon staying bright, the grass and earth around her wet and cold. Anna gripped Thomas's tombstone, clawing her way to standing. She needed to get inside. She needed to confirm that Thomas was still alive. But she stepped too hard on her bruised ankle and stumbled. Crying out, she grabbed hold of the next tombstone over, keeping herself from further harm. She gripped her hands around the stone till her knuckles strained against the skin. The pain eased only a little, but enough for her to begin limping toward the vicarage. But she had only gone a few miserable limps when she paused. A sick feeling in her gut. Anna knew this graveyard, knew these tombstones. She knew there were empty plots next to William and Charlotte, one of which now seemed to have a cruel new stone declaring her son's demise. But next to his the one she'd gripped. Anna turned and she heard Charlotte's bubbly laughter. It called into the cold night of All Hallows Eve, where there had been 2 stones, and tonight 3. There was now a fourth tombstone for a 4th family member with a familiar name. Anna.
Anna resisted waking up as long as she could. After she'd collapsed from pure shock, she flailed around in the murky depths of unconsciousness, feeling her body floating upwards towards the surface. She fought to stay down below, where blessed numbness shielded her from the half-remembered horrors that lay in waiting above. But the throbbing in her ankle and a far-off shrieking sound were dragging her back, willing her back into her physical being. She broke the surface. Anna sat bolt upright in the cemetery and gasped as if she were drowning and about to go under again. Her lungs filled with sharp, cold night air as her eyes began to focus. She was still in the graveyard, but alone. Ragged clouds raced across the sky as silver moonlight bathed the tombstones that jutted out of the ground around her like broken teeth. Gingerly, Anna reached for her ankle and was surprised to find that the pain had subsided, almost to the point of a dull memory. William's coat, which had previously weighed her down with sopping rain and sleet, was now completely dry and enveloping her with warmth. She brought the cuff to her face and inhaled deeply. William's familiar scent flooded through her, and her eyes filled with hot tears. The ground beneath her was dry and cold as she stumbled to her feet. Gusts of wind rattled the tree branches above her and dragged the rusty iron gate of the church cemetery back and forth slowly. Anna willed herself to turn around. Charlotte's phantom was gone. Gone, too, were the tombstones bearing her name and that of Thomas. Had she dreamt them? Something else was different, too. Anna leaned forward in the moonlight, not comprehending. Where her family plot had been, there was nothing but unbroken dead grass and dirt. William and Charlotte's graves had been erased from existence. Were they still alive? Had this all been a terrible nightmare? Anna's heart leapt with hope as she spun around to look up at the old vicarage. The windows were bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, and on the lower floor she could make out shadows passing back and forth as the sound of supper dishes being cleared floated to her across the night air. A tall shadow paused in front of the dining room window, cupping its hands in front as it bent over. A tiny flame caught in the shadows as a match was struck, and the figure's face was illuminated and leaned forward to light a pipe. William. Anna cried out with joy and sprang forward to bound across the cemetery. But her feet would not move. They stayed anchored to the ground like the tombstones around her, heavy and unyielding. Becoming frantic, Anna cried out at the top of her lungs, "William! William! Darling, I'm here!" Seemingly unaware of her, the figure in the window shook out the match. As he did, all the windows were plunged into darkness. Anna wailed, desperately trying to yank her feet from the ground. They remained tethered to the brown earth, immovable. Sobbing, Anna tore at the ground with her bare hands until she collapsed into a crumpled heap, defeated. Anna cradled herself in William's coat, rocking back and forth and drawing ragged, shallow breaths. Suddenly she stopped. Were her senses deceiving her, or was that pipe smoke wafting gently on the wind? She drew in great, greedy breaths of air, hoping desperately that William might be near. Again, the scent of smoke reached her. But this wasn't the scent of tobacco smoke. It was something else. Oily. Pungent. Just down the road that led away from the vicarage and into Beldonshire proper, a flickering light began to illuminate the treetops of the old sycamores that hugged the narrow thoroughfare. The light was accompanied by the growing sound of movement and far-off voices. The light grew brighter, and the noise grew louder. Suddenly, a crowd began to emerge from around the bend. Torches revealed a throng of villagers making their way towards the vicarage, faces twisted with anger and shouting over each other, as men and women Anna recognized as parishioners worked themselves into a hateful frenzy. "My daughters are dead!" shrieked a matronly woman Anna recognized as Martha Sedgwick. who used to sing in the choir on Sundays and liked to bake walnut pies for church bake sales. "Dead!" she screamed again, brandishing her torch in front of her like a weapon as she made her way towards the vicarage. You said the Lord would protect us. You said we'd be safe in his house," bellowed Timothy Crane, the shy, bespectacled editor of the Beldonshire Sentinel. 37 parishioners are dead, Reverend Smythe. The blood of 37 souls is on your hands." Anna looked on in alarm as shadows within the house, William, Timothy, Charlotte, ran from window to window, hurriedly latching them shut from the inside. She heard the iron rod that barred the heavy front door being drawn and dropping heavily into place. The house was dark and silent as flickering light from the approaching torches began to bathe the wooden shingles in an orange glow. Anna remembered now that last fateful Sunday service held in defiance of the plague in their midst. They had banded together there in the church, one final time, desperate for a sense of community and spiritual solace. In the days that followed, death had spiraled outward like a spider web and slowly decimated their congregation. By the end of the week, more than half of the parishioners who attended that service had to be stacked up and burned, lest their corpses infect those lucky enough to still be among the living. The crowd reached the house and stopped. For a moment it was silent except for the sound of wind whipping at the flames emanating from the torches. Then, with a sudden cry, Martha Sedgwick hurled her torch at the front door. It bounced off the heavy-carved wood and landed on the ground. The dead grass began to smoke as the wind carried a shower of sparks back towards the house. Soon other torches were hurled at the house, shattering windows and spreading flames. In moments, fire began to lick at the old cedar shingles and work its way up the side of the vicarage walls. Anna watched with horror as fire began to consume the house. She remembered it all now, being inside that night, screaming for her children as she fought her way through the flames and roiling smoke. William, finding her, wrapping her protectively in his heavy coat with the last of his strength, collapsing as he pushed her through the wall of flame, barring their way through the French doors of the study and out onto the widow's walk. In the end, his valiant act had only bought her a few more moments before the glass doors had blown out, and flame forced her to the very end of the railing. Anna looked up at herself and saw it all again now, the nightly scene she'd been doomed to repeat over and over again. A tiny figure wrapped in a big black coat as fire consumed the widow's walk around her. "No," she whispered as she watched herself from below. "Please, not this time." The figure above her hesitated for just a moment, then faced straight ahead as she stepped off the roof and plunged over the side of the house. Anna covered her face and screamed. Anna awoke with a start, her heart pounding and her lungs gasping for air. The echoes of a half-remembered scream faded in her ears as wind howled outside, around the vicarage. Downstairs, she heard the old grandfather clock strike 2 in the darkness. It was All Hallows Eve.